Welcome to Declassified Deep Dive, where unredacted files reveal hidden truths. Let's uncover the secrets. I'm your host, Raj, and each week we explore a new secret deep dive.
Okay, so imagine you get this top secret dossier. It lands on your desk marked eyes only, that kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're doing today.
I like it.
We're diving deep into these CIA family jewels.
Right.
So these are declassified documents released back in 2007.
Yes.
That detail some of the agency's most, I don't know, questionable activities. I think that's a good word for it.
Yeah, so this is really a fascinating look into a period of intense Cold War paranoia. We're talking about the 1970s,
Right.
post-Watergate,
Right.
when public trust in the government was, I think, really at an all-time low.
Oh, yeah.
And the CIA, in a move of, shall we say, forced transparency,
Right.
decided to declassify these documents.
It's like they opened up Pandora's box and all this crazy stuff came out, like exploding seashells meant for Castro,
Right.
domestic spying operations targeting journalists and politicians.
And even these mind control experiments.
Yeah.
They sound like they're straight out of a, sci-fi thriller or something.
It's true. I mean, some of these plots are so outlandish.
Right.
They almost seem comical.
They really do.
When you read the details, it can seem absurd, almost farcical.
Yeah.
But the implications are anything but.
Right.
We're talking about serious matters here.
Yeah.
Like, take the assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, for example.
Right.
Exploding seashells.
Right.
Poison pills disguised as cigars.
It's
Like these were actual plans.
It's like they sat down and they were like,
Yeah.
all right, let's think of the most crazy way
The most outlandish.
to take out Castro.
Exactly.
And then they just
Let's just run with it.
yeah, let's just do it.
And they did.
But, I think what's important to remember here is that these documents reveal a much larger pattern
Absolutely.
of U.S. interventionism.
A pattern that continues, I think, to this day.
It does. And it often, these interventions are framed as being,
Right.
necessary for national security.
Yeah.
But they really end up benefiting a small group of individuals
Yeah.
rather than really serving any broader national interest.
That's a great point. And I know you've had firsthand experience researching these types of interventions.
Yes.
Particularly with your work on the 1954
That's right.
CIA-backed coup in Guatemala.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to get a clear picture
Right.
of what really happened
Yeah.
when you're dealing with, classified information.
Yeah.
It's a real challenge.
Yeah.
But these family jewels,
Yeah.
they offered some crucial missing pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
It helped to corroborate accounts
Yeah.
and shed some light on how this operation actually unfolded.
It's like trying to put together a historical jigsaw puzzle.
Exactly.
But some of the pieces are missing on purpose.
Yes. Deliberately hidden.
Yeah. And it's the same with the 1953 coup in Iran, right?
Yes, absolutely.
When the CIA orchestrated the overthrow of a democratically elected government.
And that had a profound impact on the Middle East.
Right.
I mean, it's contributed
The
to
huge consequences.
right. The instability that we see in the region today.
Yeah. It's a chilling reminder, I think, of the long-term consequences
Yes.
of these actions.
I guess.
And we're still dealing with them today.
We are, and it's important to remember that the CIA isn't some rogue entity,
Right.
acting on its own.
Yeah.
This is an executive agency carrying out orders and
Yes.
directives from the top.
Right.
So these weren't just the actions of a few rogue operatives.
Yeah.
These were sanctioned
Right.
at the highest levels of government.
Which makes you wonder, how much has really changed since the 1970s?
Right.
Are these types of activities still happening?
That's a good question.
Just with,
More sophisticated technology?
more sophisticated technology. Yeah.
That's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
I think the family jewels
Yeah.
give us a glimpse into the past,
Yeah.
but they also serve as this stark reminder
Right.
of the enduring nature of power
Yeah.
and the ever-present temptation
Mm.
to operate in the shadows.
It's both fascinating
Yeah, it is.
and kind of unsettling at the same time.
It is.
But all right, let's unpack some of the specifics in these family jewels. What were some of the I don't know, most surprising or
Sure.
maybe bizarre things you came across in your research?
Well, one that comes to mind immediately
Yeah.
is the CIA's involvement with a mafia member, Johnny Roselli, in an attempt to assassinate Fidel Castro.
Wait, they actually tried to recruit a mobster to take out Castro? Yeah. That sounds more like a Hollywood movie.
I know, right?
Than, real life.
It does.
So what was the plan?
Well, the plan involved poison pills. Roselli had connections to individuals within the Cuban government.
Right.
The idea was to slip Castro these pills. But as you might have guessed, the plot ultimately failed.
So it's incredible how
it is
events that could be mistaken for, some kind of fictional spy thriller actually happened.
It did.
I mean, it really speaks to the lengths to which the CIA was willing to go to achieve its objectives, even if it meant working with organized crime.
Precisely.
It makes you wonder about the trade-offs they were willing to make and what lines they were willing to cross.
Yeah, and you have to remember, this was during the height of the Cold War.
Right.
And the fear of communist expansion often seemed to outweigh any moral qualms.
Yeah, so let's move on to another fascinating, I think, aspect of the family jewels, these domestic spying operations. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the documents reveal widespread surveillance of American citizens, including journalists and politicians.
Right.
For example, Project Mockingbird involved tapping journalists' phones and intercepting their communications.
Wow, so they weren't just going after, foreign adversaries.
No, they were spying.
They were spying on their own people.
On their own people, that's right.
What was their justification for that?
Well, the official reason was to identify leaks of classified information.
Right.
But the scope of the surveillance went far beyond that.
Right.
It was, in essence, an attempt to control the narrative.
Wow.
And suppress dissent.
That's a pretty serious violation of privacy.
It is.
And a direct, I think, assault.
Absolutely.
On the First Amendment. Did they ever face any repercussions for these actions?
Well, there were congressional hearings and investigations, but no one was ever held criminally liable to these activities.
So they just basically got away with it.
Yeah, the CIA argued that their actions were necessary to protect national security.
Of course.
And the government, for the most part, accepted that rationale.
It's a classic example, I think, of power operating with very little
oversight.
To no oversight.
That's right.
And I think it's a reminder that it's so important to hold these people in power accountable.
Absolutely.
Especially when we're talking about these intelligence
agencies.
So speaking of questionable activities, what about these behavioral modification experiments?
Yeah, these are particularly disturbing.
They are.
The CIA conducted numerous experiments involving mind control and behavioral modification, and often on unsuspecting civilians.
Oh, wow.
Now, the details of these experiments are still largely classified, but the available evidence suggests a blatant disregard for human rights.
That sounds like something straight out of,
I know,
a dystopian novel or something.
Yeah, some kind of science fiction thriller.
What was the goal of these experiments?
Well, the overall goal was to develop techniques for manipulating individuals and controlling their behavior, potentially for use in interrogation or espionage activities.
Wow.
The dark chapter
in
the CIA's history.
Yeah.
And the full extent of their activities in this area still remains shrouded in secrecy.
A chilling reminder of the dangers, I think, of unchecked power and the importance of transparency and accountability.
Absolutely.
These family jewels, even though it's just a partial disclosure,
Yes.
They offer a glimpse into this shadowy world
They do.
of espionage and reveal a pattern of interventionism that's had a profound impact on global events.
They have. And it's crucial to remember that these actions weren't simply the result of some rogue operatives acting on their own. These were sanctioned at the highest levels of government. And they reflect, I think, a broader ideology of American exceptionalism and this willingness to intervene in other countries' affairs to further U.S. interests.
Again, begs the question, how much has really changed since the 1970s?
Right.
Are these types of activities still taking place?
I think that's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
While the family jewels offer a window into the past, they also serve as a stark reminder of the enduring nature of power.
Right.
And the ever-present temptation to operate in the shadows.
Yeah. It's a sobering thought.
It is.
But an important one.
Yes, it is.
I need to be aware of this potential for abuse.
Absolutely.
Remain vigilant and hold those in power accountable.
I agree.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit.
And delve into another intriguing detail mentioned in the Family Jewels.
Okay.
The case of Yuri Ivanovich Nosenko.
Ah, yes, Nosenko.
Yeah.
He was a KGB defector
Okay.
who arrived in the U.S. in 1964,
Oy.
but the CIA suspected
Okay.
he might be a double agent
Uh-oh.
sent by the Soviets to spread disinformation.
A suspected double agent.
Yes.
Talk about intrigue.
I know.
So
sure.
was the CIA suspicion justified?
Well,
What happened to this guy?
the CIA placed him under what can only be described as house arrest
Wow.
for several years.
Wow.
He was subjected to intense interrogation.
Right.
He even underwent polygraph tests,
Okay.
but the agency remained unconvinced of his loyalty.
Wow.
They feared he might be part of
Yeah.
a sophisticated Soviet plot
Right.
to mislead them.
It sounds like a real life.
It does. Spy thriller.
Yeah, complete with the paranoia and the suspicion
Yeah.
and the intense interrogation.
Yeah. So how did this all end?
Well, eventually,
Yeah.
the CIA concluded
Okay.
that Nosenko was indeed a legitimate defector.
Okay.
But by then, the damage was already done.
Wow.
He had spent years in confinement,
Wow.
subjected to psychological pressure and scrutiny.
Wow.
It's a really sad case.
It is.
It highlights, I think,
Yeah.
the CIA's inherent distrust
Right.
and the lengths to which they were willing to go
Yeah.
to protect their interests,
Right.
even at the expense of an individual's freedom.
It's a chilling reminder, I think, of the human cost of these covert operations that are often hidden from public view.
Right, hidden from view.
So this inherent distrust wasn't limited to potential defectors.
No, it wasn't.
The Family Jewels also revealed that the CIA provided various forms of support
Correct.
to local police departments.
Yes, the documents show that the CIA provided equipment and training to local police,
Okay.
often under the guise of counterterrorism efforts.
Right.
However, the scope of this cooperation
Yeah.
raises concerns about the blurring of lines
Right.
between domestic law enforcement
Okay.
and intelligence gathering.
So they were essentially militarizing local police forces.
In a way, yeah.
So what kind of equipment and training are we talking about?
We're talking about surveillance equipment,
Okay.
audio countermeasures,
Okay.
even training in riot control tactics.
Wow.
It essentially provided the CIA
Yeah.
with a backdoor
Right.
into domestic law enforcement operations.
That's a disturbing trend,
It is.
especially considering, the potential for abuse.
Absolutely.
Did this cooperation extend
Yes, it did.
to other events or agencies?
It did. The Family Jewels
Okay.
also detail the CIA's support
Okay.
to the United States Secret Service
Okay.
during the political conventions of 1968.
Okay. What kind of support?
Well, the exact nature of
Yeah.
their involvement is
Yeah.
still partially redacted.
Okay.
But it's clear
Yeah.
that they were more than just passive observers.
Okay.
They had personnel on the ground,
Right.
actively assisting the Secret Service
Yeah.
at both the Democratic and Republican national conventions.
It raises concerns about the CIA's involvement
It does.
in domestic political events.
Yes.
Right? Were they simply, monitoring potential threats?
Right. Were their actions more politically motivated?
Yeah.
It's a question worth asking.
It is.
And the Family Jewels,
Yeah.
while offering a glimpse into these activities,
Yeah.
don't always provide clear answers
I agree.
about the motivations behind them.
It's like trying to solve a mystery,
Exactly.
but, some of the clues are missing.
Some of the crucial clues have been deliberately obscured.
Yeah. All right, let's delve into another intriguing revelation from the Family Jewels.
All right.
The CIA's involvement
Oh,
of
God.
testing specialized equipment in Miami just
Oh.
prior to the 1972 Republican National Convention.
This is an interesting incident
Yeah.
because it highlights, I think, the CIA's willingness
Yeah.
to push boundaries
Yeah.
and potentially overstep their mandate.
Okay.
The documents describe
Yeah.
the testing of equipment
Okay.
that could be used for surveillance or counterintelligence operations.
Wait, so they're testing
Yeah.
spy equipment in Miami leading up to a major political convention?
Yes,
This sounds like a recipe for disaster,
it does, doesn't it?
especially given their history of domestic spying.
It certainly raises questions
Yeah.
about their intentions
Right.
and the potential for abuse.
Yeah.
And what's even more troubling, I think, is that this testing was conducted near hotels.
Right.
Where politicians and delegates were staying, potentially compromising their privacy and security.
It's a clear example of the CIA's disregard for the Fourth Amendment. And they're willing to operate
in a legal gray area.
In a legal gray area.
Yeah.
What were the consequences of this incident?
Well, the documents reveal that the incident was investigated internally.
Okay.
But like many of these revelations, no significant disciplinary action was taken.
So they basically got away with it again.
Pretty much.
It's a frustrating example of this lack of accountability that often surrounds these intelligence agencies.
Absolutely.
But let's shift our focus to a more recent, I guess, aspect of the CIA's history.
Okay.
Their evolving role in a post-9/11 world.
Yes. The attacks of 9/11 fundamentally reshaped the intelligence landscape.
Yeah.
It prompted a significant expansion of the CIA's powers and responsibilities.
So they basically became even more powerful after 9/11.
Yes.
What were some of the specific changes that took place?
The Patriot Act, passed in the wake of 9/11, granted the CIA sweeping powers to conduct surveillance, collect data, and detain individuals without due process.
Wow.
The agency's budget also increased dramatically, allowing them to expand their operations and recruit more personnel.
It's a clear example, I think, of how a crisis can be used to justify, you know, the erosion of civil liberties and the expansion of state power.
That's right.
What are some of the implications of these changes?
Well, the expanded powers of the CIA have raised concerns about government overreach and the potential for abuse.
Right.
The agency's involvement in drone strikes, extraordinary rendition, and mass surveillance programs has drawn criticism from human rights groups and privacy advocates.
It's a complex and contentious issue. It's one that highlights, I think, this delicate balance between national security and individual freedom.
That's right.
So let's circle back to the family jewels for a moment. I'm curious about your overall perspective on the significance of these documents.
Okay.
What do they tell us about, you know, the CIA's culture and their methods of operation?
Well, I think they offer a valuable glimpse into the inner workings of the CIA.
Right.
They reveal a culture of secrecy, a willingness to operate outside the law, and a tendency to prioritize national security above all else, even at the expense of individual rights.
It's a stark reminder.
It is.
Of the potential for abuse when power is concentrated in the hands of a few, operating with little or no oversight.
Exactly.
But before we move on, I want to touch on one more, I guess, intriguing aspect of the family jewels. The CIA's involvement in mail interception.
Ah, yes. The documents reveal that the CIA operated a program called SR Pointer, which involved intercepting and opening mail, both domestic and international.
So they were essentially reading people's mail.
They were.
What kind of mail were they targeting?
Well, the program focused on intercepting mail from and to certain countries of interest, but it also involved the random sampling of domestic mail.
Wow.
The CIA argued that this was necessary to identify potential threats, but the scope of the program was vast and intrusive.
Yeah, it's a clear violation of privacy.
It is.
And an overreach of their authority.
It is.
Did this program ever face any legal challenges?
Well, the program was eventually shut down after its exposure in the 1970s. But no one was ever held accountable for these actions.
So, again, they basically got away with it.
They did.
It's unsettling to think about, you know, the scope of their activities and the lack of accountability. But this is just the tip of the iceberg.
It is. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of what these documents reveal about the CIA's operations and the lengths to which they were willing to go.
Okay, so let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll delve even deeper into the family jewels and what they tell us about the CIA power and the pursuit of secrecy.
All right,
we'll be right back after this expert speaker. All right, so we've just started to kind of unpack this trove of secrets hidden within the CIA's. You know, these family jewels.
Yeah, it's like peeling back layers of this shadowy onion.
Right.
And with each layer, the story gets more complex, more intriguing, and frankly, more unsettling.
More unsettling.
Yeah. But I think it's important to not lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah. What's the bigger picture here?
I think what we're really talking about is power. Its uses, its abuses, and the lengths to which those in power will go to protect it.
Yeah, and the family jewels provide, I think, a very unique insight.
They do.
Into how power operates in the shadows, particularly in the realm of these intelligence agencies.
Right. They reveal a pattern of behavior that I think goes beyond individual actions or even specific historical contexts.
Right.
It's about a mindset, an ideology that prioritizes national security above all else, often at the expense of individual rights and democratic principles.
It's like they're playing this high-stakes game of chess on this global scale.
Right.
And the pawns are often, you know, unsuspecting citizens.
Yes, often citizens.
Both at home and abroad.
That's right.
Speaking of which, the family jewels also revealed something called Operation CAOS.
Ah, yes. Operation CAOS.
Yeah, it sounds ominous.
It does.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So Operation CAOS was authorized by President Johnson back in 1967.
All right.
It was a domestic spying operation aimed at infiltrating and disrupting anti-Vietnam War groups. The CIA collected files on thousands of American citizens.
Wow.
Many of whom had no connection to illegal activities whatsoever.
So they were spying on peaceful protesters.
Essentially, yes.
Just because they opposed the war.
It was a massive overreach of the CIA's authority and a clear example of how the agency, driven by Cold War paranoia and this fear of dissent, targeted its own citizens.
And it's incredible how they could justify these actions in the name of national security.
I know. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah. So let's move on to another program mentioned in the family jewels.
Right.
One that involved providing support to the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs.
Yes. The BNDD.
The BNDD?
Yes. This is where things get a bit murky.
Okay.
So the CIA was tasked with helping the BNDD recruit and vet potential informants.
Right.
However, the documents suggest that the line between legitimate recruitment and using individuals for covert operations became blurred.
So they were using drug informants
for
their own, you know,
for their own clandestine purposes.
Clandestine purposes.
That's right.
Yeah, that seems ethically questionable.
To say the least, yes.
To say the least.
And what's particularly troubling is that the CIA was apparently aware that some of these informants were involved in illegal activities themselves.
Oh, wow.
It raises questions about the agency's judgment and the lengths to which they were willing to go to achieve their objectives.
It's a classic case, I think, of the ends justifying the means.
Yes, it is.
Which is a dangerous philosophy.
It is a dangerous philosophy.
And can easily lead to abuses of power.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's shift our focus to a seemingly less dramatic, yet equally intriguing, I think, revelation from the family jewels.
Okay.
The CIA's use of funds to assist the White House with responding to public mail related to President Nixon's speech on Cambodia in 1970.
This is an interesting incident.
Yeah.
Because it raises questions about the appropriate use of taxpayer dollars and the agency's involvement in domestic political matters.
Oh, so they're using CIA funds to support a White House PR campaign.
Essentially, yes.
It just seems like a misuse of their resources.
It does.
And a blurring of lines.
Yes, it does.
Between intelligence operations and political maneuvering.
The documents detail how the CIA provided financial assistance to cover the costs of printing postage and addressing replies to letters received in response to Nixon's speech.
It's a reminder, I think, that the CIA's influence extends far beyond the realm of, you know, traditional espionage.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so let's shift our focus to another aspect of the CIA's history that's, I think, often overlooked, their involvement in academic research.
Yes, the family jewels reveal that the CIA funded and influenced academic research projects, often without the knowledge or consent
Oh, wow.
of the researchers involved.
Because they were manipulating academia.
In a way.
Yes.
For their own purposes.
They saw academia as a valuable resource for intelligence gathering and a potential tool for influencing public opinion.
It's a disturbing example of how the CIA sought to shape the narrative and influence public discourse through seemingly innocuous channels like academic research. So let's delve into a specific example of this. The publication of a book titled "Where's the Rest of Me?" by a former CIA officer named Harry Murphy. Yes. This incident highlights the challenges of separating the CIA's interests from legitimate academic pursuits.
So this book.
The book was marketed as a personal memoir. But it contained information that the CIA deemed sensitive. So the agency intervened to ensure that certain details were omitted from the final publication.
So they were censoring a book.
Essentially, yes.
Written by one of their own former officers.
They were concerned about the potential disclosure of sensitive information.
So it's a blatant attempt to control information.
It is.
And limit public access to potentially,
Yes, to control the narrative.
And all the details.
And limit access to information that might be embarrassing to the agency.
It's a stark reminder. Even seemingly innocuous activities, like the publication of a memoir, can become entangled in this web of secrecy.
Yes, they can.
That surrounds the CIA.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the CIA's internal security measures. The family jewels offer some pretty intriguing insights.
They do.
Into how the agency protected its own secrets. And dealt with potential threats from within.
The documents reveal that the CIA had this robust internal security apparatus that was focused on identifying and neutralizing potential threats from within its own ranks.
Though they were spying.
In a way.
On their own spies.
They were very concerned about the risk of infiltration and betrayal. Especially during the Cold War.
It sounds like a very...
paranoid.
Yes, it was a paranoid and distrustful environment.
Where everyone was a potential suspect.
It's true. This internal surveillance was seen as a necessary measure to protect their secrets and ensure the loyalty of their personnel.
It sounds like something straight out of
I know, right?
A spy novel where everyone is a potential double agent and, trust is a rare commodity.
Yeah, trust was in short supply.
So let's delve into a specific example of this internal surveillance. The case of an informant who had developed this close relationship with a Cuban national.
This case highlights the CIA's concern about potential compromise.
So this informant had been
reporting on Cuban activities, but they had developed an intimate relationship with a Cuban individual.
And this raised some red flags.
Yes, it raised red flags within the agency. And it prompted an internal investigation to determine whether the informant's loyalties had shifted.
So they were worried that this informant might be compromised. And potentially, revealing sensitive information to the Cubans because of this personal relationship.
Yes, it's a classic dilemma for intelligence agencies. How to balance the need for human intelligence with the risks of betrayal and deception.
It's a high-stakes game.
It is.
Where trust is paramount. But constantly under scrutiny.
That's right. Trust but verify. As they say.
It's a world where personal relationships can become entangled with national security concerns.
Absolutely.
Leading to suspicion, distrust, and potentially devastating consequences.
Yes, very true.
Okay, so let's talk about another aspect of the CIA's internal security measures. Their efforts to prevent leaks.
Yes. Leaks, a constant challenge.
Huge challenge.
For any intelligence agency. So the family jewels reveal that the CIA took extensive measures to prevent leaks. This included monitoring the communications of its employees, conducting internal investigations, and even prosecuting individuals who were suspected of disclosing classified information.
So they were cracking down on whistleblowers.
In a way, yes.
It seems like a fine line.
It is a fine line.
Between protecting national security and suppressing dissent,
That's right.
Or information that might be embarrassing to the agency.
Yes, the agency viewed leaks as a serious threat to national security, and they took aggressive steps to prevent them.
They would argue
They argued
that unauthorized disclosures could compromise sources and methods and ongoing operations, potentially putting lives at risk.
That was their argument.
Yeah, so let's look at a specific example of the CIA's efforts to plug these leaks.
Okay.
Their investigation of a potential disclosure regarding polygraph examinations conducted on behalf of the State Department.
Right. This case highlights the CIA's concern about unauthorized disclosures of sensitive information.
Yeah.
So the agency investigated allegations.
Okay.
The details about these polygraph examinations had been leaked to the press.
Okay.
Potentially jeopardizing ongoing operations and damaging the CIA's reputation.
So they were trying to cover their tracks.
Essentially, yes.
Classic case of damage control.
It is a classic case of damage control, prioritizing their own image over transparency and accountability.
It's a clear example, I think, of the CIA's efforts to control the narrative and prevent potentially embarrassing revelations.
That's right. It's a reminder that even in a democracy, intelligence agencies often operate with a high degree of secrecy and autonomy, which makes it difficult to hold them accountable for their actions.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
And one that raises questions about, the balance of power.
In a democratic society.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to another intriguing aspect of the family jewels. The CIA's relationship with other government agencies.
So it wasn't just a one-man show. The documents reveal this complex web of cooperation and competition between the CIA and other agencies, including the FBI, NSA, and even the State Department.
So they were working with...
Sometimes working with...
Or sometimes against.
Sometimes against, that's right.
Other parts of the government.
Yes. Each agency had its own agendas, its own priorities, and internal rivalries, often leading to conflicts and turf wars.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
I know, right? It sounds like chaos.
Yeah.
Well, the family jewels offer a glimpse into these often turbulent relationships between these agencies.
It's a reminder that the intelligence community
is not this, monolithic entity.
No, it's not. It's a collection of diverse organizations, often operating with conflicting goals, and competing for resources and influence.
It's a complex,
often
often messy world.
It is a messy world.
Where clear lines of authority and responsibility can be hard to find.
It can be hard to discern.
Yeah, so let's look at a specific example of this interagency cooperation. The CIA's provision of technical support to the FBI.
Yes. The documents detail how the CIA provided the FBI with equipment and training, particularly in the areas of surveillance and counterintelligence.
So they were helping the FBI with their domestic spying.
In a way, yes. This cooperation was often framed as a necessary measure to combat common threats.
Yeah, but it also raises concerns about, the blurring of lines between domestic and foreign intelligence gathering.
That's right. Especially given the FBI's history of targeting domestic political groups.
Yeah. It's a dangerous precedent.
It is.
Especially considering, the FBI's own history.
Yes, it highlights
actionable activity.
The close relationship between these two agencies, despite their sometimes competing interests.
And
it's a reminder that the lines between domestic and foreign intelligence gathering can often become blurred, especially in times of crisis or perceived threat.
It's a reminder that, the intelligence community kind of operates in a world of its own.
It does.
With its own rules.
It has its own rules.
And its own justifications.
Its own justifications.
Often operating outside, the traditional checks and balances.
Outside the traditional democratic society.
Checks and balances.
So let's talk about another instance of interagency cooperation.
The CIA's role in supporting the White House's efforts to gather information on student dissent.
Yes, this incident.
Which is a topic that's particularly relevant today.
Took place in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And it highlights the CIA's involvement in monitoring domestic political activities.
So the agency provided information and analysis.
They did.
To the White House.
To the White House.
On student groups that were opposed.
That's right.
To the Vietnam War.
A movement that was seen as a threat to national security by the Nixon administration.
So they were spying on American college students.
Essentially. Yeah.
What was the justification for that?
Well, the White House under President Nixon was very concerned about the growing anti-war movement. And they sought to gather intelligence on these groups, potentially to disrupt their activities or discredit their leaders.
It was a time of great social and political upheaval, and the government's response was often characterized by paranoia and a willingness to suppress dissent.
Yes. That's an accurate assessment.
It's a chilling example.
It is.
I think of how the government used intelligence agencies to target its own citizens simply because they held dissenting political views.
Yes, they did.
It makes you wonder how much has really changed.
That is the question, isn't it?
Since then, are we still vulnerable?
Are we still vulnerable
to this kind of government overreach?
The family jewels offer a window into a past era. But they also serve as, I think, a warning about the enduring potential for abuse of power. Especially when it comes to intelligence agencies and their capacity for surveillance and disruption.
It's a reminder that we can't take our freedoms for granted.
No, we can't.
We need to be vigilant. We need to be informed and engaged citizens, holding those in power accountable.
Yes, holding them accountable.
And defending our rights.
Absolutely.
So let's delve into a specific aspect of this surveillance. The CIA's efforts to acquire information on a research project being conducted by a professor named Robert Vesco.
Ah, yes. This incident highlights the CIA's interest in monitoring academic research, particularly when it touched upon topics of political or strategic importance.
So they were spying on academics.
Essentially, yes.
And their research.
They were very interested.
What was so special about Vesco's work that it attracted the attention?
The specifics of Vesco's research are not fully detailed in the family jewels. But it appears to have focused on economic and political trends in Latin America. Was a region of particular interest to the CIA during the Cold War.
It's a reminder that the CIA's intelligence gathering extended far beyond traditional espionage activities.
That's right.
Encompassing a wide range of fields and disciplines.
That's right. They saw potential threats and sources of information everywhere. Even in the halls of academia.
So the CIA, during this period, viewed the world.
They did. They viewed the world through a Cold War lens. Seeing potential enemies and conspiracies everywhere. And this mindset led to a vast expansion of their intelligence gathering operations. Often blurring the lines between legitimate national security concerns and unwarranted intrusions into the lives of private citizens.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
And one that raises questions, I think, about the long-term consequences of this, expansive approach to intelligence gathering.
But
let's shift our focus to another intriguing aspect of the family jewels. The CIA's involvement in activities that seemingly went beyond their legislative charter?
Yes, this is where I think the documents raise serious questions about the CIA's accountability and the limits of their authority.
So they were operating.
In
this legal gray area.
In a gray area.
Yeah, where the rules were often...
bent or broken in the name of national security.
Bent or broken in the name of national security.
That's right.
So what kind of activities are we talking about?
Well, for example... The documents mention the CIA's involvement in providing support to private individuals who were engaged in activities that were not officially sanctioned by the U.S. government.
So these individuals might have been involved in operations that were deemed...
too risky, too politically sensitive for the CIA to directly engage in. But the agency still saw value in supporting their efforts.
So they were operating as this rogue agency.
In a way.
Answerable to no one but themselves.
Not a concern.
So let's delve into a specific example of these questionable activities.
Okay.
The CIA's contacts with E. Howard Hunt.
Ah, yes. E. Howard Hunt.
A former CIA officer.
Former CIA officer.
Who was later implicated.
Who was later implicated in the Watergate scandal.
In the Watergate scandal.
Yes.
So Hunt's case is particularly interesting.
It is.
Because it highlights...
It highlights the CIA's tendency to maintain ties with former employees.
Right.
Even those who had moved on to other pursuits.
Right.
Some of which were potentially illegal.
Right.
Or at least ethically dubious.
So they were keeping tabs.
It seems
on their alumni.
Yes, keeping tabs on their alumni.
Even those
who had gone rogue.
Yes. Yeah, it seems like a really risky strategy.
It is a risky strategy.
One that could easily backfire.
Yes, it could.
And implicate the agency.
And implicate the agency in illegal activity.
Yeah, it raises concern.
It does.
About the agency's accountability and their potential involvement in activities that were outside the law.
Right. It also speaks to the CIA's culture of secrecy.
Right.
And their reluctance to sever ties with individuals who might possess valuable information or skills, even if those individuals had become liabilities.
It's a chilling reminder.
It is.
That the CIA's reach extended far beyond, its official mandate.
Yes, it did.
Right. Often operating in the shadowy
world of clandestine operations.
Clandestine operations and covert influence.
That's right.
Okay, so let's delve into another example of the CIA's questionable activities.
Okay.
Their role in acquiring telephone routing slips for overseas calls.
Yes. This practice, which took place in the late 1960s and early 1970s, involves the CIA obtaining records of telephone calls made between the U.S. and foreign countries.
So essentially spying. On international communications.
That's right. And this was done without warrants or judicial oversight.
It's a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment.
It raises serious concerns about the invasion of privacy and the agency's disregard for legal boundaries.
So what was the justification for this?
Well, the agency argued that this was necessary to identify potential threats and track the activities of foreign agents.
Of course.
But it raised serious concerns about the invasion of privacy and the potential for abuse.
Right. This practice predates the modern era of mass surveillance.
It does.
But it kind of foreshadows. The government's growing appetite for collecting and analyzing vast amounts of data about its citizens.
Absolutely.
It's a clear example of the CIA's willingness to push the boundaries of their authority. So we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
In this deep dive into the CIA's family jewels.
Yes.
It's been kind of a wild ride, I think.
It has been a wild ride.
Through this shadowy world of assassination plots, mind control experiments, domestic spying, and media manipulation.
We've seen it all.
We've seen how the agency operated in the shadows, often exceeding its authority and engaging in activities that were
questionable,
ethically questionable, if not outright illegal.
The
family jewels, I think, offer a really sobering reminder.
They do.
Of the dangers of unchecked power.
Yes.
And the importance of transparency. And accountability, especially when it comes to institutions like the CIA that operate largely in secrecy.
It's clear that the release of these documents back in 2007 was a watershed moment. It forced the agency to confront its past. And it prompted calls for reform.
But the question remains. How much has really changed since then? Have we learned from the mistakes of the past? Or are we doomed to repeat them in this new era of technological advancements and evolving threats?
That's the challenge we face.
It is.
The society.
The family jewels provide this historical context.
They do.
But the underlying issues of power secrecy and the tension between national security and individual freedoms, they're as relevant today as they were during the Cold War.
I agree.
Think about it for a second. We live in a world of mass surveillance, drone strikes, cyber warfare.
That's right.
Where the lines between
Yes.
Legitimate national security activities and overreach
Can be blurry.
can be blurry.
It can be very blurry.
The potential for abuse, I think, is greater than ever.
I think so, too.
And the need for vigilance and oversight
Is paramount. We can't let our guard down.
Right. So as we wrap up
Okay.
this deep dive, let's consider, I guess, what lessons we can draw from the family jewels and how we can apply them to the challenges we face today.
I think one key takeaway is the importance of a healthy skepticism towards those in power.
Right. We can't just blindly trust.
We can't afford to blindly trust institutions.
Right.
Especially those that operate in secrecy.
Right. We need to demand transparency.
Absolutely. Ask tough questions.
Ask tough questions.
And hold our leaders accountable.
Hold them accountable.
For their actions.
For their actions, yeah.
Another crucial lesson, I think,
is the importance of safeguarding our civil liberties.
Yeah.
The family jewels really demonstrate
They do.
how easily these rights can be eroded in the name of national security.
That's right, especially during times of crisis
or
perceived threat.
Right, so we need to be vigilant in defending our freedoms.
Absolutely.
You know, our freedom of speech.
Freedom of speech.
Freedom of the press.
Freedom of the press.
Freedom of assembly. Our right to privacy.
Privacy.
We have to resist any attempts to curtail these rights.
We have to resist any attempts to curtail these rights.
Even in the name of security.
Even in the name of security.
The family jewels, I think, also highlight the importance of whistleblowers and investigative journalism.
Absolutely.
Without individuals who are willing to speak truth to power and journalists who are dedicated to uncovering the truth. These abuses might have remained hidden.
They might have remained hidden.
So we need to protect.
We need to protect those.
Those who expose wrongdoing. And support a free and independent press.
Absolutely. A free and independent press is essential.
So ultimately, the family jewels remind us that we as citizens, we have this responsibility to engage in the public discourse. To hold our leaders accountable. And to defend the principles of a democratic society. We can't afford to be passive observers.
No, we can't. We need to be informed, engaged, and active participants in shaping the future.
Active participants.
That we want to see.
The choices we make today will determine whether we learn from the mistakes of the past.
That's right.
Or repeat them in a new and a potentially more dangerous form.
In a new and potentially more dangerous form.
So let's end this deep dive with a call to action.
All right. I like it.
Be informed.
Be informed.
Be engaged.
Be engaged.
Don't be skeptical.
Be skeptical.
And be vigilant in defending our freedoms.
Be vigilant.
The future of our democracy, I think, depends on it.
I agree. The future of our democracy depends on it.
And remember, these family jewels, they're just one chapter.
They're just one chapter.
In a much larger story.
In a much larger story, that's right.
The pursuit of power.
Yes.
The allure of secrecy.
The allure of secrecy.
And this tension between security and freedom. These are enduring themes.
They are enduring themes.
That will continue to shape our world.
They will continue to shape our world.
Just stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay informed.
Stay informed.
And keep asking questions.
You keep asking questions.
Yeah, the truth is out there.
The truth is out there.
Waiting to be uncovered.
Waiting to be uncovered.
And it's up to all of us to seek it out.
Yes, it is.
And demand accountability.
From
those who would keep it hidden. So the family jewels may be a relic of the past.
They may be a relic of the past.
But their lessons are timeless.
Let's use them wisely.
To guide us towards a more
just and transparent future.
And
that's a wrap.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive. Into the CIA's family jewels. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.
On this journey.
Through
the shadows of history.